The sun was already setting over the London horizon when Roderick Albright's private jet landed at London City Airport. After an exhausting week of negotiations in New York, the powerful real estate development businessman could barely wait to hug his son Matthew, who was only 7 years old. A longing clutched his chest as the driver took him through the busy streets of Kensington to his sumptuous mansion. The 3-story property, with its impeccably manicured gardens and illuminated central fountain, was the materialization of the empire Roderick had built after years of tireless work. Since the early passing of his first wife, Eliza, a victim of a fatal illness 3 years ago, he had immersed himself even further in work as a way to escape the pain. And it was during this period of vulnerability that Vanessa Meadows entered his life. Beautiful, sophisticated, and seemingly devoted, Vanessa Meadows first won his admiration, then his heart, and in less than a year became the new Mrs. Albright. At first, Matthew resisted his stepmother's presence, but Roderick attributed this to the normal adjustment process of a child still suffering from his mother's absence. In time, the boy seemed to get used to it, or at least that's what Roderick wanted to believe. "We've arrived?" "Sir," announced Charles, the driver, parking in front of the main gate. Roderick got out of the car and took a deep breath. The mansion lights were on, and he imagined Vanessa and Matthew awaiting his arrival in the living room, as they usually did. However, upon entering the hall, he found only his wife flipping through a decorating magazine on the sofa. "Darling, it's good you're back." Vanessa stood up with a practiced smile, adjusting the turquoise dress that accentuated her perfect figure. "How was your trip?" "Productive but tiring," Roderick replied, looking around. "Where's Matthew?" "Oh, he already had dinner and went to sleep. He was exhausted after swimming," she explained, approaching to kiss him. "Would you like me to ask Mrs. Zelda to warm up your dinner?" Something in Vanessa's tone sounded strange to Roderick. He checked his watch. It was only 8 in the evening. "Sleep? So early?" he questioned, frowning. "You know how children are. One day they're full of energy, the next they're dropping from exhaustion," Vanessa justified, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture she always made when nervous. "He was so happy when he heard you were coming back today. He wanted to stay awake but couldn't." Roderick nodded, still suspicious. "I'll go check on him before dinner." "I don't think that's a good idea." Vanessa held his arm. "He had a hard time falling asleep. If you wake him now, it'll be difficult to get him back to sleep." Roderick hesitated, but his paternal instinct spoke louder. "I'll just peek in, I won't wake him." As he climbed the stairs towards his son's room, Roderick noticed the unusual silence in the house. Mrs. Zelda, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for over 10 years, would usually be in the kitchen preparing something, but the service area was completely silent. Passing down the corridor, he noticed that Matthew's bedroom door was closed. He slowly turned the doorknob, but the door didn't open. "It's locked," he murmured to himself, confused. He went back downstairs and found Vanessa on the phone, speaking in a low tone. When she saw him, she quickly ended the call. "His bedroom door is locked," Roderick declared, without beating around the bush. "Oh, yes," Vanessa smiled. "It's just that he's been having sleepwalking episodes. The pediatrician recommended locking the door to prevent accidents." "Sleepwalking? Since when? Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to worry you during your trip." "It started a few weeks ago." Before Roderick could question further, a noise from the exterior called his attention. He walked to the window and saw a shadow moving near the rubbish bins. "It must be an animal," Vanessa commented, visibly tense. "The new neighbors have a dog that keeps escaping." Ignoring the comment, Roderick headed to the back door. As he stepped out into the garden, he followed the path to the service area, where the waste bins were located. What he saw there froze his blood. Matthew, his son, was crouched among torn rubbish bags, rummaging through food scraps with trembling hands. The child, wearing only thin pajamas despite the cold London night air, was visibly thinner than Roderick remembered. When the boy looked up and saw his father, his eyes widened in a mixture of terror and relief. "Matthew!" Roderick exclaimed, rushing to his son. The boy instinctively flinched as if expecting a reprimand. This reaction hit Roderick like a punch to the stomach. "Son, what are you doing here?" he asked, lowering himself to the child's level. I was hungry, Dad," Matthew whispered, his lips trembling. "She doesn't let me eat. She says I'm too fat." His son's words were like daggers to Roderick's chest. He looked more closely at Matthew and noticed how emaciated he was, with deep dark circles under his eyes and cheeks that were once chubby, now sunken. "Who doesn't let you eat, son?" "Aunt Vanessa," the boy murmured, looking nervously behind him, as if fearing to be heard. "When you travel, she locks my room. I can only leave to go to school, and even then, she tells the teacher I have eating problems and can't eat in the cafeteria." Roderick felt a mixture of anger and guilt suffocating his chest. How had he not noticed before? How had he allowed this to happen right under his nose? "Matthew, when was the last time you ate?" "Yesterday morning. A piece of apple before school." At that moment, Roderick heard approaching footsteps and turned to find Vanessa standing at the service area door with an expression of feigned concern. "Oh, there you are, Matthew. We were so worried," she exclaimed, moving forward as if to hug the boy, who immediately recoiled behind his father. "He must have had another sleepwalking episode. I'll take him back to his room." Roderick slowly rose, positioning himself between Vanessa and his son. "No, you won't," he declared with a calm that masked the inner storm. "Matthew said he's hungry. We're going to the kitchen to prepare something for him to eat." "Roderick, the doctor was very clear about his diet. The boy has an eating disorder. He invents these stories." "Enough, Vanessa," Roderick cut her off. He picked Matthew up, shocked at how light he was, and headed into the house. In the immaculate kitchen, while warming up a full meal for his son, Roderick observed the voracity with which the boy devoured a buttered roll he had given him as an appetizer. The scene broke his heart. How had he not noticed the signs? The 2 short video calls during his trips, always controlled by Vanessa. The comments about special diets. His son's increasing shyness, who used to be so lively. Meanwhile, Vanessa remained at the kitchen door, alternating between expressing concern and contained irritation. "Roderick, you're letting him manipulate you. This behavior will only reinforce his eating problems." Ignoring her, Roderick placed a steaming plate of rice, beans, and chicken in front of his son, who looked at the food as if it were treasure. "Eat slowly. Son," he instructed, sitting beside him, "tomorrow we'll talk calmly about all of this." As he watched Matthew eat, he realized that nothing would be the same again. Trust was irretrievably broken, and a chasm had opened between him and the woman he had thought he knew. The most important thing now was to ensure his son's safety and well-being. But for that, he needed to understand the extent of what had happened during his absences. The night was long for Roderick. After making sure Matthew had eaten properly, he settled his son in his own bed, where the boy fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted. Sitting in an armchair beside him, he watched the child's restless sleep while his mind swirled with questions and contradictory feelings. Vanessa had tried to intervene several times, alternating between tears and arguments about how Roderick was being unfair by believing his son's fantasies. He had asked her to sleep in the guest room. He needed time to think. The truth was, he could barely look at his wife without feeling a mixture of anger and incomprehension. At the first rays of sun, he made his decision. He picked up his cell phone and called the only person he knew he could fully trust at that moment. "Gerald? Sorry to call so early," he said in a low voice so as not to wake his son. "I need your help." "It's urgent and confidential." Gerald Oliver, a former federal police officer and current head of security for Albright Enterprises, was more than an employee. He was a trusted friend, discreet and efficient. "I'm on my way." "Mr. Albright," the man replied without hesitation, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. While waiting, Roderick took the opportunity to check his son's room. What he found only increased his horror. The luxurious room, decorated with such care when Matthew was a baby, now had an external lock recently installed. The toys were stored in sealed boxes. The small refrigerator they kept stocked with juices and snacks for the boy was empty and unplugged. In the closet, Matthew's clothes seemed much smaller than they should be for a 7-year-old boy. Some still had tags never worn. In the ensuite bathroom, he found bottles of vitamins and food supplements, as well as a notebook where Vanessa meticulously recorded Matthew's weight and calorie count, with weekly weight loss goals. When Gerald arrived, he found a devastated Roderick, sitting in the living room with a grave expression. "What happened, sir?" the security chief asked, immediately noticing the tension in the atmosphere. In a few words, Roderick explained the situation. Gerald's normally impassive face could not hide his indignation. "I need you to install discrete cameras throughout the house," Roderick requested. "I want to know exactly what happens when I'm not here. And I also need access to the old security system records. You know that the house cameras only record external areas and the entrance hall, as Mrs. Vanessa requested a few months ago, citing privacy," Gerald explained, with a tone that made his suspicion at the time clear. "But we have backups of everything since the installation. I want to see all recordings from the last 3 months," Roderick determined. "And installed new cameras today without her noticing. I'll arrange it now. I know people who can do it discreetly while Mrs. Vanessa is out of the house. She has tennis lessons at 10 in the morning. She usually takes a few hours." Gerald nodded and left to make the preparations. Meanwhile, Roderick checked on Matthew, who was still sleeping soundly. He went down to the kitchen and found Mrs. Zelda preparing breakfast. The housekeeper avoided his gaze, looking embarrassed. After a few minutes of uncomfortable silence, Roderick decided to gently confront her. "Mrs. Zelda, you've worked with us for over 10 years. You've taken care of Matthew since he was a baby. Please, I need to know the truth." The middle-aged woman finally looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "Mr. Albright, I tried to tell you, but Mrs. Vanessa threatened me. She said she would fire me and make sure I would never get another job in London. What happened when I traveled?" Roderick insisted, feeling his stomach churn. "She would lock the boy in his room sometimes for days. She said it was to control his weight, that he needed discipline." Mrs. Zelda's voice faltered. "I tried to leave food hidden for him, but she counted everything in the pantry, supervised meals. She fired 3 employees who tried to interfere." The revelation was like a punch. Roderick felt sick, realizing that Vanessa's manipulation extended throughout the house, creating an environment of fear and complicit silence. "Why didn't you call me? You had my personal number." "She monitored calls, sir, and she threatened that she would take the boy from you, that she had proof you were a negligent father and worked too much. She said she knew important judges." The housekeeper wiped away tears. "Forgive me, sir. I should have done more." Before they could continue the conversation, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Vanessa appeared in the kitchen, impeccably dressed and made up as if the previous night had never happened. "Good morning," she greeted with a forced smile. "Roderick, we need to talk privately about Matthew's situation. I've already booked an appointment with Dr. Ferdinand for this afternoon." "That won't be necessary," Roderick replied, maintaining a controlled tone despite his inner fury. "I'm taking Matthew to another doctor." Vanessa's smile wavered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Darling, Dr. Ferdinand has been following his case for months. He knows the entire history of his eating disorders." "What disorders, Vanessa? The ones you invented to justify the hunger you imposed on my son?" Roderick's tone was icy. "I'm taking him to a doctor who isn't your friend." Vanessa's expression hardened. "You're being irrational, Roderick. This will only confuse the boy and hinder his treatment. If you continue with this attitude, I'll have to take measures to protect his health." The veiled threat did not go unnoticed. Roderick realized he was dealing with someone much more calculating than he had ever imagined. "You no longer have any decisions to make about Matthew," he declared, standing up. "And I suggest you pack your bags. This conversation will continue with our lawyers." "You can't kick me out of my own house," Vanessa retorted, abandoning her sweet facade. "I have rights. And if you think I'm going to let you destroy my reputation with these absurd accusations, you're very mistaken." The confrontation was interrupted by Matthew's arrival in the kitchen. The boy stopped at the door, visibly tense at seeing his stepmother. Instinctively, he recoiled a few steps. "Good morning, my love," Vanessa addressed him in a sugary voice. "Are you hungry?" "Mrs. Zelda made that special porridge you adore." Matthew looked at his father as if asking for permission or protection. "You can sit down, son," Roderick said gently. "Eat whatever you want." Under Vanessa's furious gaze, Matthew sat at the table where Mrs. Zelda quickly served a full meal. While the boy ate, the couple maintained a silence heavy with tension. Soon after breakfast, Vanessa left for her tennis lesson, not without first giving Roderick a look that mixed anger and threat. As soon as she left, Gerald arrived with 2 technicians who quickly began installing discrete cameras at strategic points in the house. "I also brought this," said the security chief. handing Roderick a laptop. "These are the external camera recordings from the last 3 months. I found some things you need to see." For over an hour, Roderick watched the images in horror. Even with the cameras limited to external areas, it was possible to see disturbing patterns. Days when Matthew did not leave his room, food delivery drivers arriving frequently, but the meals never seemed to be shared with the boy. Vanessa going out to social events while apparently the child remained locked up. One particular recording chilled his blood. Matthew, clearly thinner than normal, being practically dragged into the car on the way to school, while Vanessa smiled and waved to a neighbor as if nothing was wrong. Upon returning, the boy was led directly to his room, where the door closed and apparently locked. "Mr. Albright," Gerald called, interrupting the distressing session. "The technicians are finished. We have cameras working throughout the house now, transmitting to this secure server." He showed a small device. "Only you and I will have access." "Thank you, Gerald," Roderick replied, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of anguish. "Now I need to take Matthew to a doctor. I want official documentation about his condition. I recommend Dr. Lucy Ferris from St. Jude's Medical Center. Besides being an excellent pediatrician, she specializes in child abuse cases. I can schedule an emergency appointment." "Please," Roderick agreed, standing up. It was time to seek professional help and begin building a solid case to protect his son. The war with Vanessa was just beginning, and he needed to be prepared for what was to come. Dr. Lucy Ferris's office, on the 10th floor of St. Jude's Medical Center, conveyed the same sense of security as the doctor herself: soft-toned walls, welcoming decor, and an atmosphere that invited trust. Sitting in the waiting room with Matthew beside him, Roderick tried to remain calm, although inwardly he was devastated. "Are you okay, son?" he asked, noticing how the boy nervously swung his legs. "She'll be mad if she knows we came here," Matthew whispered, looking around as if Vanessa could appear at any moment. "Don't worry about that." Roderick held his son's hand. "I'm here to protect you, and nothing will change that." The consultation lasted over an hour. Dr. Lucy examined Matthew thoroughly, asking direct but gentle questions. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with perceptive eyes and a serene voice, asked to speak with Roderick privately after asking a nurse to take the boy for some tests. "Mr. Albright," she began, with a grave expression as she closed her office door, "your son shows clear signs of malnutrition and severe emotional stress. His weight is far below what is expected for his age. There are signs of chronic dehydration, and I found old bruises on his arms and back that suggest physical restraint." Every word was like a stab for Roderick. "And what does that mean exactly?" "It means we are facing a case of child abuse and neglect," the doctor replied directly. "As a healthcare professional, I am legally obligated to report this situation to Child Protective Services. I've already requested the presence of a social worker to assess the case." "I appreciate it," Roderick said, surprising the doctor, who expected resistance. "I want to document everything officially. My wife," he hesitated, searching for words, "she has caused this suffering to my son during my business trips. I only found out last night." Dr. Lucy observed him for a few moments, assessing his sincerity. "I understand. In that case, we will need your full cooperation. I will order a complete battery of tests and request immediate psychological follow-up for Matthew." An hour later, Felicity Ross, a social worker from the hospital, joined them. After speaking separately with Matthew, she confirmed the doctor's suspicions. "The child shows classic signs of psychological abuse and nutritional neglect," Felicity explained, consulting her notes. "He reported episodes of confinement, food deprivation, and constant verbal humiliation. Even more concerning is the deep fear he shows of his stepmother, even trembling when speaking of her." "What should I do now?" Roderick asked, feeling completely lost. "First, ensure his immediate safety," Felicity replied. "Are you able to keep him away from the alleged abuser?" "Yes, I can take him to a hotel or to my beach house in Brighton. A hotel is not advisable at this time. He needs stability," the social worker considered. "The beach house would be better, as long as you can ensure your wife has no access." "I can provide private security," Roderick assured. "And I will hire a specialized lawyer immediately." "Excellent. I will prepare a preliminary report and forward the case to Child Protective Services and the Family and Children's Court." Considering the medical evidence and the child's testimony, It is likely that we will obtain a protective order quickly. As they left the hospital, already late in the afternoon, Roderick noticed 10 missed calls from Vanessa on his cell phone. He ignored them and called Gerald. "I need you to prepare the Brighton house to receive Matthew today," he instructed, "and organize a security team. I don't want Vanessa within 100 yards of my son." "I'm on my way, sir. I also hired a digital security specialist to check all your and the boys' electronic devices. If she installed any monitoring software, we'll find out." Gerald's concern was valid. In cases like this, it was not uncommon for the abuser to try to maintain control through technology. While driving to a restaurant to properly feed his son before the trip to the coast, Roderick received a text message from Vanessa. "Where are you?" "I came back from tennis and no one told me you left. Dr. Ferdinand is waiting." Roderick chose not to respond. He knew that any contact with Vanessa now could be used against him in the future. He needed to act cautiously. At the restaurant, he observed with a heavy heart how Matthew ate with controlled voracity, as if fearing that the food might disappear at any moment. Between bites, the boy looked at his father, seeking confirmation that everything was okay. "Eat slowly, son. There will be plenty of food," Roderick assured with a sad smile. "Aunt Vanessa says fat boys aren't loved," Matthew commented, lowering his eyes to his plate. "That you would be ashamed of me if I got fat like before." The revelation hit Roderick like lightning. His son, who had always had a normal physique for his age, had now internalized a distorted self-image. "That's not true, Matthew. I love you exactly as you are. And you weren't fat. You were a healthy and happy boy." He held his son's small hand across the table. "I want you to be that boy again." The drive to Brighton was silent. Matthew fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the emotionally draining day. Upon arriving at the beach house, a modern construction overlooking the sea, they found Gerald already organizing the security of the place. "The house is ready, sir," the security chief informed. "We installed an updated alarm system and have 2 trusted men who will work 24-hour shifts. I also hired a pediatric nurse who can stay with the boy while you resolve the legal issues." "Thank you, Gerald." "I don't know what I would do without you." They had barely settled in when Roderick's cell phone rang again. It was lawyer Stuart Brennan, one of London's most respected family law specialists, whom Gerald had contacted by referral. "Mr. Albright, I've reviewed the preliminary reports Dr. Lucy sent, and the situation is serious," the lawyer said bluntly. "I recommend we file a precautionary measure early tomorrow to ensure your wife's immediate removal. We also need to request a formal investigation into the abuses." "Do whatever is necessary," Roderick authorized. "Cost is not an issue. I want my son protected, and I want her to answer for what she did." It was well past midnight when Roderick finally managed to sit on the house's veranda, watching the sea. The silence was broken by a notification on his cell phone. Vanessa had posted a photo on social media with an anguished expression, accompanied by the caption, "Difficult times when someone you love suffers from mental disorders. Pray for my family." Her strategy was clear: to start building a public narrative where she was the victim. Roderick felt a chill. Vanessa was well connected in London's social circles, known for her work in charities for underprivileged children. Ironically, she had influential friends in the media and high society. The battle would be much harder than he had imagined. The next morning, while Matthew was still asleep, Roderick received a call that confirmed his fears. It was Theo Marshall, his press secretary. "Mr. Albright, I need to warn you. Profile magazine is preparing an article about family problems at your house. A source who preferred not to be identified, obviously your wife, alleges that you kidnapped your own son during a psychotic episode, refusing essential medical treatment for the child." "My God," Roderick murmured. "She has no limits. That's not all. It seems she has already contacted other media outlets, giving exclusive interviews about how she has bravely fought to help the boy with alleged eating disorders, while you, too busy with business, neglected the situation. She is building an image of a dedicated stepmother versus an absent father." "Contact all our allies in the media," Roderick instructed. "I don't want interviews or public statements now, but we need to control the damage. Explain that this is a delicate matter involving a child and ask for discretion. Offer future exclusivity to those who respect our silence now." The strategy was risky, but Roderick knew that exposing Matthew to a media circus would only worsen the boy's trauma. He needed to protect his son, even if it meant temporarily allowing Vanessa to control the public narrative. The situation became even more complicated when, hours later, Gerald informed him that Vanessa had filed a police report alleging parental alienation and kidnapping of her own son. The police had already gone to the mansion in London to verify the complaint. "How can she be so cynical?" Roderick exploded, careful to speak softly so as not to wake Matthew. "She tortured my son for months and now plays the victim." "That's exactly why people like her managed to abuse for so long," explained Stuart Brennan, who had arrived for an emergency meeting. "They are masters of manipulation, capable of convincing others of their goodness while committing atrocities behind closed doors. But don't worry, we are already preparing our legal response." "What should we expect now?" Roderick asked, exhausted. "A war," the lawyer answered honestly. "She will use all resources. Media, social influence, false tears in public, perhaps even accusations against you. Our advantage is the medical evidence, the testimonies of the domestic staff, and of course Matthew himself. But we need to be prepared for a long and painful process." At that moment, Matthew appeared at the veranda door, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Seeing his father, he ran and threw himself into his arms. The almost insignificant weight of his son's body against his chest was the most powerful reminder of why that battle needed to be won, no matter the cost. The days in Brighton established a routine that, despite the circumstances, brought some normalcy to Matthew's life. Gradually, with proper nutrition and daily sessions with child psychologist Dr. Clara Miller, the boy began to regain not only weight, but also glimpses of the joy that had always characterized him. Roderick observed these small victories with relief, although he knew the road would be long. Each night terror, each startle Matthew had upon hearing an unfamiliar female voice, each moment his son asked permission to eat something as simple as a fruit, was a painful reminder of the trauma inflicted by Vanessa. On the morning of the 10th day in Brighton, while Matthew played in the sand under Gerald's watchful eye, Roderick received a call from Stuart Brennan. "I have news," the lawyer announced, "and you should prepare yourself because some of it is good, others not so much." "I'm listening," Roderick replied, moving to a corner of the veranda where he could speak without being heard by his son. "First, we obtained the protective order. The judge ruled that Vanessa must stay away from Matthew until the conclusion of the process, under penalty of preventive detention. We also have authorization to remove his belongings from the mansion." Roderick sighed with relief. "That's excellent. The complicated part is that her media campaign is gaining strength. She gave an emotional interview to the program Afternoon with Martha, crying live about how you allegedly prevented her from helping Matthew with his severe eating disorder. She showed medical reports, which we suspect are forged, and manipulated photos of the boy before her intervention. She is building an image of a devoted stepmother versus an absent father who, according to her, went crazy upon realizing he had neglected his son for so long." "My God," Roderick murmured, feeling a wave of nausea. "How can someone be so manipulative?" "There's more," Stuart continued. "My investigator found something interesting about Vanessa's past. She was married before to a pharmaceutical businessman from Manchester, Frederick Maxwell. They divorced 5 years ago, and curiously, the process was under sealed records." "Did you get access?" "With difficulty, but yes. And what we found is disturbing. Frederick had a daughter from a previous relationship, Sophia, who was 8 years old at the time of the marriage. There were accusations that Vanessa subjected the girl to a severe regime of discipline, including food deprivation. The father only found out when the nanny, risking her job, secretly photographed the child's bruises and the state of the room, which was locked from the outside. The similarity to what had happened to Matthew made Roderick shudder. And what happened? Frederick opted for an out-of-court settlement to protect his daughter from public exposure. Vanessa received generous financial compensation on the condition that she never again approach the child and maintain absolute secrecy about the case. He also demanded that she undergo therapy, which apparently never happened. Shortly after, she moved to London, where she met you. She repeated the pattern, Roderick concluded, horrified by the discovery. "I need to speak to that man." I've already contacted him. Frederick is willing to testify despite the confidentiality agreement. He said he cannot remain silent knowing that another child is suffering. The revelation brought a mixture of feelings to Roderick: renewed anger at Vanessa, guilt for not having investigated her past better before introducing her into his son's life, and a strange comfort in knowing that he was not alone, that another person had lived the same nightmare and managed to protect his daughter. "When can I speak with him?" he asked. "He will arrive in Portsmouth tomorrow. We thought it best to meet him in a neutral location, away from the London media." As he hung up, Roderick noticed an unfamiliar car parking near the house. Immediately, one of the security guards intercepted the visitor, a woman in her 40s, who gestured agitatedly. Gerald approached to check the situation, and after a brief conversation walked towards Roderick, bringing the woman with him. "Mr. Albright, this is Amy Carter, Matthew's teacher from his school in London." "Mrs. Carter," Roderick greeted, surprised. "How did you find us here?" "Forgive the intrusion," she said, visibly nervous. "I got the address through the school secretary. I came because I can no longer carry this weight on my conscience." Roderick indicated a chair on the veranda, keeping a watchful eye on Matthew, who continued playing in the sand, oblivious to the visit. "I'm listening." Amy took a deep breath. "I noticed something was wrong with Matthew months ago. He frequently arrived at school tired, sometimes so hungry he begged for extra snacks. I noticed he was losing weight, that his schoolwork reflected sadness and isolation." "And why didn't you contact me?" Roderick asked, trying to control the frustration in his voice. "I tried," she replied, with tears in her eyes. 3 times. Each time your wife answered. She assured me that you were aware that Matthew was undergoing treatment for a hereditary eating disorder, and that any interference from me could psychologically harm him." Amy wiped a tear. Then she appeared at the school with a letter from a doctor recommending special care for Matthew's diet, prohibiting unauthorized snacks. Because I questioned the procedure, she complained to the principal, threatened to sue the school. "And the principal gave in," Roderick concluded, better understanding the extent of Vanessa's manipulation. "Yes, your wife is very convincing, sir. When I heard that you had taken Matthew out of school and that there was an investigation into child abuse, I finally understood what was happening." She opened her bag and took out a folder. "I brought this. These are drawings Matthew made in recent months, behavior reports I personally kept, and my notes on his unexplained absences and changes I observed in him." Roderick examined the contents with a heavy heart. The drawings showed a disturbing progression. Initially colorful and joyful, they became somber, dominated by isolated and sad figures. In several of them, a tall female figure was portrayed with an angry expression, while a small male figure appeared alone or locked up. "Matthew was always an excellent student, creative and participative," Amy continued. "But in recent months he became withdrawn, frightened. Many times I found him sleeping during classes, as if he was exhausted. When I asked if everything was okay at home, he just said he needed to be a good boy so his father wouldn't abandon him too. I would never," Roderick's voice faltered. "I would never abandon my son." "I know that now," Amy assured. "But children easily believe adults who are in a position of authority over them. If your wife repeatedly told him you would abandon him if he didn't obey her rules about food, eventually he would believe it." The conversation was interrupted by Matthew's approach, returning from the beach with Gerald. Upon seeing his teacher, the boy stopped, hesitant. "Hello, Matthew," Amy greeted with a gentle smile. "I came to visit you and your dad. We missed you at school." To Roderick's surprise, instead of recoiling as he did with most women since Vanessa's removal, Matthew ran to hug his teacher. "You're not mad at me?" he asked in a low voice. "Of course not, dear. Why would I be?" "Because I ate Daniel's snack without permission that day," the boy confessed. "I was very hungry." Amy exchanged a meaningful look with Roderick before answering. "It's absolutely fine, Matthew. In fact, I brought a present for you." She took a small album from her bag. "These are photos from our last science fair, remember? You won the Most Creative Project Award with your volcano." The boy's face lit up with the positive memory, and Roderick felt a pang in his chest, realizing how much of his son's normal childhood had been stolen in recent months. After lunch, while Matthew rested, Roderick, Gerald, and Stuart met with Amy on the veranda to discuss the next steps. The lawyer was direct. "Your testimony will be crucial, Mrs. Carter. We need you to officially report your observations and present this documentation to the Family and Children's Court. It would also be important to testify about how Vanessa manipulated the school." "I will do whatever is necessary to help Matthew," the teacher stated with determination. "I would never forgive myself if I didn't do everything in my power to protect him." "We need to prepare for the counterattack," Stuart warned. "Vanessa will certainly try to discredit your testimony, claiming you have some kind of personal vendetta against her, or that you are being manipulated by Mr. Albright." "Let her try," Amy replied firmly. "I have 20 years of impeccable career and the respect of the entire school community. Besides, I'm not the only teacher who noticed the changes in Matthew. I can bring colleagues who will confirm my observations." The conversation was interrupted by a call on Stuart's cell phone. After a few minutes, the lawyer hung up with a grave expression. "Vanessa has filed a parental alienation lawsuit against you, Roderick. She claims you are using your son as an instrument of revenge due to jealousy of her ascending social career. She obtained testimonies from 3 doctors who never personally examined Matthew, but who, based on shared medical records by her, attest to the existence of said eating disorder." "That's absurd," exclaimed Roderick. "We have real medical reports, we have witnesses." "That's how it works in these cases," Stuart explained patiently. "She is using a common tactic of role reversal, turning the protector into an aggressor and the aggressor into a victim. Often this works temporarily, especially when the real aggressor is charismatic and well-connected. But the truth has a way of prevailing, especially when there is concrete evidence like what we are gathering." The rest of the day was dedicated to organizing documentation and preparing for the next legal battles. Every hour, Stuart received updates on Vanessa's new moves, interviews granted, strategic appearances at charity events for vulnerable children, emotional posts on social media, asking for prayers for her husband to seek psychological help and allow their son to receive adequate treatment. As night fell after putting Matthew to sleep, Roderick sat alone on the beach watching the waves break on the sand. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to cry, for his son's pain, for lost time, for betrayed trust, and for the battle that still lay ahead. Gerald approached silently, respecting his boss's moment of vulnerability. "Mr. Albright," he finally called, "I believe you'd like to see this." He handed him a tablet with a video paused on the screen. It was from one of the newly installed cameras in the London mansion. "This was recorded last night," he explained. "Vanessa doesn't know about the new cameras and apparently felt safe to talk openly with someone." Roderick pressed play and watched, with growing horror, his wife on a video call with an unknown woman, laughing as she planned how to use the case to destroy Roderick and secure a millionaire alimony. At one point, Vanessa made it clear that she had never really cared about Matthew, referring to the boy as the impediment and the price to pay to gain access to her husband's fortune. Roderick was speechless. "Pure gold from a legal standpoint," Gerald completed. "I've already sent it to Mr. Brennan. He's preparing an emergency petition to present to the judge tomorrow." For the first time in many days, Roderick felt a spark of hope. The battle was far from over, but now they had something that no manipulation from Vanessa could circumvent, her own voice revealing the true face behind the mask of a devoted stepmother. The tide was beginning to turn. The family and probate court in London was exceptionally busy that morning. Journalists gathered at the entrance, cameras in hand, awaiting the arrival of the parties in what the media was already calling the case of the year. The dispute between Roderick Albright, one of the most influential businessmen in the real estate sector, and Vanessa Meadows Albright, a recognized socialite and philanthropist, had captured public attention. Roderick arrived early, accompanied by Stuart Brennan and his legal team. He chose to enter through the side access, avoiding the reporters' harassment. He wore a sober navy blue suit, the determined expression of someone ready for the most important battle of his life. "Are you prepared?" Stuart asked, as they walked down the corridor towards the courtroom. To face her? Yes. To relive everything she did to Matthew? I never will be, Roderick replied sincerely. In the room reserved for the defense team, they found Frederick Maxwell, Vanessa's ex-husband, waiting with a grave expression. Beside him was Amy Carter, Matthew's teacher, nervously reviewing her notes. Gerald, always attentive, checked the latest security details on his phone. "Where is Matthew?" Amy asked. "In Brighton with Dr. Clara and a security team," Roderick replied. "I wouldn't allow him to relive this trauma by witnessing the hearing." The door opened and social worker Felicity Ross entered, accompanied by Dr. Lucy Ferris and Dr. Beatrice Oliver, the forensic psychologist appointed by the judge to evaluate the case. "Dr. Oliver, it's a pleasure to meet you personally," Stewart greeted, extending his hand to the serious-faced professional. "I wish I could say the same. Counselor, but the circumstances are regrettable," she replied. "I concluded my report yesterday. As determined by the judge, I cannot discuss the content with the parties before the hearing, but I can say that I was thorough and impartial in my analysis. That's all we ask," Stewart assured. Minutes later, a murmur in the corridor announced Vanessa's arrival. Through the partially opened door, Roderick glimpsed his ex-wife surrounded by her legal team, led by Marina Caldwell, a lawyer famous for defending celebrities in divorce cases. Vanessa had calculated every detail of her appearance: a discreet pastel-colored dress, light makeup that enhanced a studied pallor, hair tied in a simple bun. The perfect image of the dedicated and wronged wife. Their gazes met for a brief moment. Where Roderick expected to find regret or at least tension, he saw only a cold confidence that deeply disturbed him. Even with all the evidence, Vanessa seemed genuinely convinced of her victory. "Don't be intimidated," Stewart murmured beside him. "That confidence is part of the act. She doesn't know about the video recording yet." At 10 o'clock sharp, everyone was called into the courtroom, presided over by Judge Claudia Miller, known for her firm stance and deep knowledge of family law cases involving vulnerable children. The initial proceedings unfolded with typical formality, but the temperature of the room rose when Marina Caldwell presented Vanessa's version. "Your Honor, we have here a classic case of parental alienation, motivated by revenge. My client, Mrs. Vanessa Albright, dedicated herself entirely to the health and well-being of her stepson Matthew, who suffers from a severe compulsive eating disorder. It was she who noticed the first signs, sought specialized help, and implemented the treatment recommended by doctors," the lawyer continued, painting a picture of Vanessa as the selfless stepmother who sacrificed her social life to care for a troubled boy, while Roderick, consumed by work, delegated all parental responsibilities to his wife, only to later accuse her unjustly when confronted with his own negligence. "We present reports from 3 renowned specialists confirming Matthew's diagnosis," Marina concluded, handing the documents to the judge. "Furthermore, we have testimonies from close family friends who witnessed my client's tireless dedication and the father's constant absence." When it was Stewart's turn to present the defense, his approach was direct and incisive. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of parental alienation, but a systematic pattern of physical and psychological abuse perpetrated by Vanessa Albright against a defenseless child." His voice was firm, without emotional exaggeration. "We will present irrefutable medical evidence of malnutrition and psychological trauma, testimonies from professionals who interacted daily with Matthew, and concrete proof that the alleged eating disorders were a fabrication used to justify the deprivation of food, confinement, and constant humiliation of the child." Judge Claudia remained impassive as the evidence was presented. Dr. Lucy's medical reports documenting Matthew's debilitated physical state, photographs of the room locked from the outside, Mrs. Zelda's emotional testimony describing how Vanessa obsessively controlled the boy's diet and threatened employees, the drawings and school reports brought by Amy Carter, and finally, Frederick Maxwell's testimony about the similar pattern of behavior Vanessa had shown with his daughter years earlier. During each presentation, Vanessa maintained an expression of offended disbelief, occasionally wiping discreet tears with a handkerchief. Her lawyers frequently objected, questioning the credibility of the witnesses and the relevance of past facts. The decisive moment came when Dr. Beatrice Oliver presented her conclusions. After extensive sessions with Matthew Albright, analysis of previous medical and psychological reports, and interviews with both parties, I conclude that the child shows unequivocal signs of complex trauma resulting from prolonged psychological abuse and nutritional neglect, the psychologist declared with clinical objectivity. The minor demonstrates intense fear specifically associated with the figure of the stepmother, separation anxiety in relation to the father, and cognitive distortions related to food and his own body, consistent with systematic humiliation. Turning to the other part of the report, she continued, "As for Mrs. Vanessa Albright, the psychological evaluation indicated significant narcissistic personality traits with patterns of emotional manipulation, low genuine empathy, and a tendency to instrumentalize relationships for personal gain. Particularly concerning was her inability to demonstrate authentic remorse or understanding of the impact of her actions on the child." The room fell completely silent when Stewart asked permission to present a final piece of evidence. The video recording of Vanessa coldly discussing her plans to use the case to destroy Roderick financially, referring to Matthew in derogatory terms. Marina Caldwell immediately stood up, vehemently protesting against the admissibility of the recording, alleging invasion of privacy. The recording was made on property legally belonging to Mr. Roderick Albright, using a security system registered in his name, Stewart countered. Furthermore, the content is of superior public interest, as it reveals the true nature of Mrs. Vanessa's relationship with the minor and her real intentions in this process. After a few minutes of deliberation, the judge allowed the evidence to be presented. The video was displayed on a screen installed in the courtroom, and every word spoken by Vanessa fell like a hammer on her own defense. For the first time, the mask of calculated suffering slipped from her face, replaced by an expression of barely contained rage. When the lights were turned on again, Judge Claudia addressed Vanessa directly. "Mrs. Albright, I would like to hear your explanation for the content of this video." For a moment, Vanessa seemed disoriented, nervously consulting her lawyers. Then, composing herself, she attempted one last maneuver. "Your Honor, that conversation was taken out of context. I was under extreme stress due to the false accusations, just venting to a friend. I would never harm Matthew, whom I love like a son. All I did was strictly follow medical guidelines to treat his compulsive eating. And did the doctors recommend locking the child in his room and depriving him of basic food?" the judge questioned with evident incredulity. "They were necessary behavioral control measures," Vanessa insisted, her voice now with a defensive tone that contradicted her previous softness. "Discipline is fundamental in treatment. Perhaps I was too rigorous, but always thinking of his well-being." Judge Claudia observed her in silence for a few moments before declaring, "This court does not consider food deprivation, forced confinement, and psychological abuse as discipline or treatment under any circumstances. These are acts of violence against a vulnerable child." The rest of the hearing proceeded with a sense of inevitable conclusion. After hearing the final considerations from both legal teams, the judge retired to deliberate, returning in less than an hour, an exceptionally short time for a case of this complexity. Considering the seriousness and consistency of the evidence presented, this court rules the following, Judge Claudia announced in a firm voice. Sole custody of Matthew Albright is granted to the father, Mr. Roderick Albright. Mrs. Vanessa Meadows Albright is prohibited from having any contact with the minor, directly or indirectly, until further court order. I further determine that the case be forwarded to the Crown Prosecution Service for criminal investigation of child abuse. A murmur ran through the room as the judge continued. Additionally, by virtue of the psychological trauma inflicted, I determine that Mrs. Vanessa Albright bear all expenses for the psychological treatment necessary for the child's recovery, for as long as professionals deem appropriate. Vanessa remained motionless in her chair, her expression frozen in a mask of disbelief, while Marina Caldwell already whispered about possibilities for appeal. On the other side of the room, Roderick felt a wave of relief so intense that he had to lean on the table to keep from swaying. Stuart squeezed his shoulder in a silent gesture of congratulation. The session was adjourned, and as the teams gathered their materials, Roderick noticed Vanessa staring at him across the room. For a brief moment, the mask completely fell, revealing a calculating coldness that made him shiver. There was no remorse in those eyes, only anger at being unmasked and defeated. In the courthouse corridor, awaited by a crowd of reporters, Roderick opted for a brief statement. Today, justice prevailed, not just for my son, but for all children who suffer in silence. I ask for respect for our privacy during this time of healing and rebuilding. As he walked to the car, his phone rang. It was Gerald, with the news he most wanted to hear. Matthew is fine, playing on the beach with the nurse. I already told him about the judge's decision. He asked when you're coming home. Home. The word had never sounded so comforting, not the mansion in London, marked by painful memories, but the place where his son felt safe and loved. Tell him. I'll be there for dinner, Roderick replied, with the first genuine sense of peace in many months. The war was not completely over. He knew Vanessa would fight with all her might against the criminal charges, that she would use her contacts to try to rewrite the narrative in the media, that the road to Matthew's full recovery would be long and sometimes painful. But the main battle was won. His son was safe, and together they would find the strength to rebuild what had been broken. 6 months had passed since the court decision that definitively removed Vanessa from Matthew's life. The beach house in Brighton, initially a temporary refuge, had become the permanent home for father and son during the recovery period. The mansion in London had been put up for sale. Neither Roderick nor Matthew wished to return to a place imbued with painful memories. On that sunny Sunday morning, Roderick watched from the veranda as Matthew ran on the sand with Max, the chocolate Labrador they had adopted 3 months earlier. The contrast between the boy now and the one he had found rummaging through the rubbish for food was striking. Matthew had regained a healthy weight for his age. His cheeks again had the healthy glow of childhood, and most importantly, his eyes sparkled once more. "Come play, Dad," the boy shouted, waving enthusiastically. Roderick didn't hesitate. Abandoning his half-finished cup of coffee, he went down to the beach and joined his son in playing with the dog. These simple moments had become sacred to him. After almost losing Matthew, every smile, every laugh was a treasure to be celebrated. The recovery had not been easy. The first months were marked by frequent nightmares in which Matthew woke up screaming, convinced he was locked up again or that he would starve. Food insecurity persisted. The boy still hid small portions of food in his pockets or under his mattress, as if fearing his next meal might not come. Dr. Clara, the psychologist who continued to see him 3 times a week, assured him that these were normal reactions to the trauma experienced, and that with time and consistent treatment, they would diminish. And indeed, little by little, signs of improvement began to appear. Matthew had returned to school, a new school near the beach house, where no one knew his past and where he could start over without the weight of curious or pitying glances. Amy Carter, his former teacher, maintained regular contact, visiting them occasionally on weekends. Roderick had also changed profoundly. He completely reorganized his professional life, transferring the administrative headquarters of his companies to Portsmouth, and implementing a system that allowed him to work mostly from home. Business trips, once frequent and prolonged, became rare and short, never more than 2 days. When absolutely necessary, Matthew accompanied him, with Gerald, now promoted to a kind of personal assistant and family security, always present to ensure the well-being of both. That afternoon, while having lunch on the veranda overlooking the sea, Matthew surprised his father with an unexpected question. "Dad, can we invite Aunt Amy to live with us?" Roderick almost choked on his juice. "Live with us? Why are you thinking about that, son?" "Because she's nice, she helps me with my homework, and you smile differently when she's here," the boy replied with the typical frankness of children. "And she likes Max as much as we do." Roderick couldn't help but smile. It was true that in recent months his relationship with Amy had evolved into something beyond gratitude for the crucial role she had played in saving Matthew. What began as conversations about the boy's school progress gradually turned into long walks on the beach, dinners that stretched into the night, and a connection that both hesitated to name, but which grew visibly. "It's not that simple, Matthew. Aunt Amy has her own house, her job in London. But she said she got a transfer to the school here, the boy argued. I heard you talking last week. Eavesdropping on adult conversations, are we? Roderick feigned severity, but couldn't hide his smile. It was by accident, Matthew defended himself. So can we invite her? Let's take it easy, son. This kind of decision takes time. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Gerald, accompanied by Frederick Maxwell and his daughter Sophia, now 13 years old. The two had become frequent visitors, united with Roderick and Matthew by a shared experience that had created a unique bond between the families. Sophia immediately ran to Matthew, the two already sharing the complicity of those who had survived similar experiences. I brought the books I promised, she announced, displaying a small pile of colorful volumes. As the children moved away to explore the literary treasure, Frederick sat down with Roderick. How are the preparations going? He asked. Roderick sighed. Almost complete. The launch event for the foundation is scheduled for next month. I confess I'm nervous. I've never been involved in anything like this before. The New Paths Foundation was Roderick's latest project, an organization dedicated to protecting child victims of psychological abuse and training education professionals to recognize early signs of mistreatment. Frederick had committed as one of the main supporters, along with other businessmen sensitized by the story, that despite Vanessa's efforts to control the narrative, eventually reached the public in its true outlines. It will be a success, Frederick assured. The cause is noble and necessary. We know better than anyone how this type of abuse can go unnoticed, hidden under the guise of discipline or health concern. Amy Carter had already accepted the invitation to head the Foundation's educational department, developing protocols and training for teachers. Mrs. Zelda, the housekeeper, who had suffered so much from not being able to adequately protect Matthew, would also join the team, and surprisingly, Gerald, the former security guard, who had proven to be much more than an employee, would take over operational coordination. How is Sophia doing? Roderick asked, observing the girl who was now reading animatedly to Matthew under the shade of a tree. Better every day, Frederick replied with a smile. The trauma never completely disappears, but she has learned not to let it define who she is. The group therapy sessions have helped a lot. Being able to share with other children who went through similar situations diminishes that feeling of being different or broken. That's why I want to include these sessions as a central part of the foundation, Roderick agreed. Matthew has also benefited immensely from them. The conversation drifted to practical matters about the foundation's structure, budgets, and the scope of planned programs. Frederick, with his experience in the pharmaceutical industry, offered valuable insights into institutional partnerships and fundraising. Later, as the sun began to set, Amy arrived carrying a box of sweets from the local confectionery, a small ritual that had been established in recent weeks. Matthew ran to help her, with a familiarity and comfort that took months to develop. Initially, the trauma had made him distrust almost all adult female figures, except Mrs. Zelda. But Amy, with her unwavering patience and genuine affection, gradually won not only the boy's trust, but also his affection. As everyone gathered around the table on the veranda for afternoon tea, Roderick felt a wave of gratitude. Amidst the tragedy that had been the discovery of Vanessa's abuses, this new family had also emerged, unconventional, formed by bonds that transcended blood, united by overcoming and by the determination to transform pain into purpose. What are you thinking about? Amy asked softly, sitting beside him. How life can completely change in a few months, he replied. How sometimes we need to lose almost everything to discover what truly matters. She smiled, understanding. And what truly matters to you, Roderick Albright? This, he gestured, encompassing everyone around the table. Real people, genuine connections, no more appearances or empty social conventions. Matthew's laughter rang clear as Max tried, unsuccessfully, to balance a biscuit on his snout under Sophia's patient guidance. You know, Roderick continued, Matthew asked me an interesting question today. Oh really, what was it? He wanted to know if you'd like to live with us, he revealed, carefully observing her reaction. Amy blushed slightly, but held his gaze firmly. And what did you say? That this kind of decision takes time, he said, then added with a smile. But I didn't say how much time. The moment was interrupted by Matthew, who approached running. Dad, can I sleep at Sophia's house tonight? Uncle Frederick said we can build a fort in the guest room. Roderick exchanged a look with Frederick, who nodded with a complicit smile. If you want to, son, it's fine by me. Yay, the boy cheered, running back to share the news with Sophia. It looks like we'll have the house to ourselves tonight, Roderick commented, turning to Amy. A perfect opportunity to talk about that living arrangement proposal, she replied with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. I have a few conditions to present. The rest of the afternoon passed in an atmosphere of relaxation that, months earlier, would have seemed impossible. When Frederick and Sophia left, taking Matthew with them, and Gerald discreetly withdrew to his house at the back of the property, Roderick and Amy walked along the beach as the sky was tinged with orange and red. Did you know, Dr. Clara said, Matthew is ready to reduce his sessions to once a week, Roderick commented. That's wonderful, Amy replied. He's really made incredible progress. Children's resilience is amazing when they have the right support and love. We still have a long way to go, he pondered. Just yesterday I found him hiding bread under his pillow. These are behaviors that can persist for a long time, Amy reminded him. The important thing is that he knows he can talk about his fears, that he's not alone in the healing process. They walked in silence for a few minutes until Amy asked, And what about Vanessa? Any news? Roderick sighed. The criminal case is still ongoing. From what Stuart informed me, she's trying to negotiate a plea bargain to avoid prison, claiming psychiatric problems. Honestly, I don't care about the legal outcome, as long as she stays away from Matthew. And how do you feel about all of this now? The question was delicate but necessary. Both knew that the rebuilding was not just for Matthew, but also for Roderick, who needed to deal with the guilt of not having noticed the signs and the betrayal of someone he had trusted. Each day is a little better than the last, he answered honestly. The work with the foundation has been therapeutic. Transforming that terrible experience into something that can help other children gives some meaning to the suffering. And seeing Matthew return to being a happy boy, his voice choked slightly, that's worth more than anything else. Amy squeezed his hand in a silent gesture of understanding. When they reached a small cove protected by rocks, Roderick stopped and turned to her. You know, I think Matthew is right, he said with a smile. You should consider that invitation to live with us. The house is too big for just the two of us, and Max clearly has a crush on you. Amy laughed. Ah, so I'm being invited because of the dog? Among other reasons, he replied, moving closer. Mainly because I've never met anyone as courageous and as principled as you. Someone who risked their own career to protect a child who wasn't even theirs. Someone who saw beyond appearances when everyone else was deceived. I only did what any decent person would do, she protested softly. No, you did what few people have the courage to do. Confront the system, question authorities, persist when it would have been easier to give up. And Matthew is here today, safe and healthy, largely thanks to you. Amy didn't respond with words. Instead, she rose on her tiptoes and kissed him softly, sealing with that gesture the promise of a new beginning. When they returned to the house under the starry sky, Roderick looked at the space around him with new eyes. That place that had begun as a temporary refuge against the terror experienced in London had transformed into a true home, not because of the walls or the privileged sea view, but because of the bonds that had strengthened there, the healing that bloomed each day and the possibilities that opened on the horizon. In his office, on the desk, lay the official invitation for the launch of the New Paths Foundation. Beside it, a recent drawing by Matthew showed a family on the beach, himself, Roderick, Amy, Max, and even Gerald, all holding hands under a bright sun. Above, in colourful and uneven letters, the words "My family" filled Roderick's heart with a joy that months earlier would have seemed impossible. On the opposite wall, a framed quote that had become the motto of both the foundation and his personal life. There are paths we only find after getting completely lost. The journey of pain had not completely ended, for Matthew, for Roderick, or for the thousands of children who still suffered in silence in homes that should be their refuge. But there was now a light guiding the way, a renewed determination, and above all the certainty that no one needed to walk these paths alone. Looking at Amy, who was now curiously exploring the bookshelves in the living room, Roderick smiled. Sometimes from the ashes of the worst tragedies, the most beautiful opportunities for a fresh start are born. And this was just the beginning.